Fantastic, and thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here with Mid-Ulster District Council. This is always a highlight of the Council's week when it comes to economic development in the district. You are definitely there with a council that's there to support you. I have been listening to the litany of events that have been taking place this week, events on emotional intelligence, events focusing on talent in the manufacturing industry, personal branding, even rebel ideas. Can you believe it? All of the different ideas that have been exposed over the course of this week. And I'd like to take this opportunity to flag up an amazing event that's happening this evening. If you know anybody in retail, if you have any friends in retail, if you have any family members in retail, please do book in to hear from the amazing Mags McAlpine at 7 p.m. how to recreate the magic of retail, something that we're all looking forward to. We're all dying to get out there and spend our £100 vouchers, and Mags is going to make sure that your retail premises benefits as much as possible from all that additional spend. So if you know anybody in that sphere, please do make sure and let them know, because Mags always brings energy and ideas to everything that she does. But that's not why you're here this afternoon. You're here to hear a little bit about how to negotiate in a hybrid world. And what we're talking about here, folks, is really how to persuade the unpersuadable. We all have those people in our lives. I'm sure many of you can think of the know-it-all, the narcissist, the disagreeable person, the stubborn person. How is it that you get those people to flex their thinking a little bit and come around to your side of the table? Not an easy task at the best of times. And now that we're in a hybrid world, for some of us, there are new skills that we need to bring to the table. So let's spend a little bit of time together over the course of the next hour, looking at some ideas that I hope can help you. So before I get started, what I'd like to ask is, who is in the room? I'm going to pop up a little poll now, and if you would just find the answer that best suits you or best describes you. I think it's always nice for everybody in the room to know who else is here, because we can't actually see one another. We're all at a webinar in a virtual world now, and it's lovely for me to know too who it is that I'm speaking to and what your priorities might be for the course of the session. As you're all doing that, as you're all looking at the poll, as you're all answering those questions, let me just reiterate what Sarah had said. As we go through the session today, I'd like to make it as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, please pop them in the chat. Please use the Q&A. Please let us know how you want to interact with the session, and we'll be able to answer those questions as we go along. I am allowing time at the end of the session for more in-depth Q&A, but I know what it's like in these virtual environments. Sometimes I'm talking away and you're thinking, what on earth is she talking about? Could you please clarify that point? Use the chat function or the Q&A function to ask for any clarity that you seek as we go along. We need to make sure this works for you. This is a session that you get what you need out of it. And I've noticed too that Sarah has dropped a link to Mag's retail session this evening into the chat. So if you think that would be interesting, please do register or forward it on to somebody else who might be interested. Thanks so much to Mid-Ulster District Council for hosting all of these events and bringing all of you together to benefit from all of this expertise. So a little bit of Twitter handles, how you can reach us if you're enjoying the session or if you're finding anything of the session of interest. You can see Mid-Ulster District Council Twitter handle up there. My Twitter handle is bespoke_comms. Most of the time you'll find me on LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect, you'll find me on LinkedIn under my name, Camilla Long, or you can follow us at Bespoke Communications on LinkedIn as well. I think we've got all of the answers to the poll. It looks to me like that poll is pretty much completed. Let's see who actually is in the room. And as I look at it, I see that we've got a few folks who work in sales, who negotiate commercial contracts. Well, I hope there's going to be some information here for you. Those of you who just, you know what, want to be heard in the workplace, there is loads here for you. Those folks in the workplace, you know, those know-it-alls, those people who don't seem to want to bend their iron will in any shape or form. There's always ways to persuade the unpersuadable. And let's have a look at how we do that. More productive conversations with your teams. Yeah, that's where we're at nowadays. How do you manage the talent around you? How do you get the most out of those teams? How do you help everybody to feel included? And how do you give everybody a voice so that we can arrive at the best possible results? Yeah, the negotiations with children. I'd love to say I'm an exemplar of that. I sent my own 16-year-old off to school this morning, and not on the best of terms. I thought on the day when I'm talking about negotiation skills, I need to take my own advice. Sometimes reflecting on those conversations, they'll get us the best possible results. So quite a variety of you in the room, which is great. We'll cover a lot of ideas that I hope will help everybody. So here's how we're going to run through today's session. We're going to take a little look at the negotiator's mindset, because actually behind every great negotiation is a whole lot of emotional intelligence. That self-awareness and that self-regulation is absolutely key to you getting what you want out of that conversation. That is not where my mindset was at 8 o'clock this morning when I had a row with my 16-year-old, and I completely recognize that and put my hand up and go, I need to do better. But whether that's a conversation with your teenager like me, or whether you're speaking with your boss or your team, we need to bring emotional clarity to every negotiation situation. Following on from that, after we've taken a little look at the mindset and what you can be doing there, I'm going to give you a really practical 5-step playbook for tools and ideas that you can use for every negotiation, every difficult conversation that you enter into. So when it comes to negotiation, why not just meet them halfway? Why not just split the pie down the middle? Well, let's think first of all about what a negotiation is. A negotiation is an exchange of value between people where there are potential benefits for both parties. That's one necessary condition of a negotiation. Otherwise, it's a steamroll of a conversation. There are usually limited resources, limited time, limited money, limited access to resources in order to achieve what it is you want to achieve. It's really important both parties have an element of control in the conversation, and that there will be elements of common ground as well as divergence. So there will be, if you were to imagine a Venn diagram, there will be some common ground somewhere in there. You both have a shared goal, a shared objective, but you may not always agree on how you get there. So what stops you getting what you want in a negotiation? Here are some of the ideas that when I asked that question, people have answered me in the past. For some folks, it's actually a desire to be liked. I don't want to go in and ask for what it is that I need, because I don't want them to think that I'm unreasonable. I don't want to look like I'm moaning. I don't want to look like I'm complaining. That wanting to be nice syndrome. Well, you know what? You may not be serving yourself, and you may not be serving the company or the other person by being nice all the time. And sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Let's look at ways that you can do that throughout the course of the session today. Then there's always the stress about the outcome. These are conversations that can live inside your head for days or even weeks before you have them. So that stress that's going on, there are conversations sometimes that you can put off. Well, you know what? If you have a difficult conversation that's living rent-free in your head, let's just get out there and have it, because you don't need that emotional drag on your work. Losing control of the situation. Yeah, there are times when you feel like, I'm not sure how they're going to react here. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to contain myself. A bit like me at 8 o'clock this morning with the 16-year-old, definitely not good. For some folks, you know what? A lot of this chat feels like a whole lot of emotional manipulation. I don't want to be playing games here. I just want to say how it is. I want them to agree with me. Sometimes we need to have a little bit of a velvet glove when it comes to that iron fist, and that we really need to rely on the fact that people persuade themselves. You'll never persuade somebody. You'll never get discretionary effort. You'll never get somebody to commit with their whole heart to something that they don't agree with. So sometimes you need to employ a few tactics so that you can bring people over to your point of view. They're not going to necessarily see that for themselves. And here's a big blocker for folks. There may be a whole great big emotional blocker that's stopping you from bringing your best self into that conversation. Maybe you're feeling angry, maybe you're feeling frustrated, maybe there's a degree of anxiety going on for you. There's some emotion there that's stopping you from bringing your whole best rational self into that conversation. So really, in short, what stops you, the only thing that stops you getting what it is that you want in a negotiation sometimes is yourself. How do you get out of your own way? And how is online different? In the old days, we sat down in a room, we had all the benefit of reading body language, looking at facial expressions, reading those non-verbal cues. Well, you know what? There are definitely benefits to the online world, because in an online world, we're looking at life in 2 dimensions rather than 3. And in terms of a negotiation or a difficult conversation, those 2 dimensions, those 2 Ds are, first of all, that we need to be more direct. People don't have time to hang around all day on Teams calls. And we need to be more disciplined. And it does require that we prepare before we go into that conversation to get what we need out of it. So being more direct, getting to the point, getting on with it, and being more disciplined, actually sitting down and reflecting about what the destination looks like before you go into the conversation. You don't get into your car and just drive aimlessly. We need to know what the destination looks like. And thinking about that, reflecting on that, and thinking about how we can manage that process will absolutely serve you. So actually, the fact that we are in an online world can make these negotiations far more productive, a lot less time spent messing around. We can get to where we need to go way more quickly. And to do that, here is a little framework that I have borrowed from the work of Chris Voss, a former FBI hostage negotiator. This is a framework, folks, that has been used to negotiate with folks with high-powered firearms in the most challenging of circumstances. And if it's worked for Chris Voss in life-threatening situations, I have a funny feeling that it can work for you. There are 5 steps to every great negotiation. The first 3 steps involve that planning, that discipline of sitting down in advance of the conversation. And it's a beautiful little framework that can really serve you in that planning situation, because sometimes you sit down, there's a load of emotions flying around in your head, you're feeling anxious, you're not sure where this conversation is going to go. How do you pin those thoughts down? Well, think through these 3 steps, and it's a great place to start, because when it comes to a negotiation, you have no control over the outcome. The only thing that you have control over is the process, and this 5-step framework will help you to do that. First up, let's think about how we set goals. You've got to know what it is that you want out of this conversation. You've got to sit down and think what good looks like. And for most of us, many of us going into these negotiations, we end up adopting a very fixed mindset here. Good looks like this. There's a binary outcome. I either get what I want or I don't. And actually having a little bit of cognitive flexibility going into that situation will absolutely serve you. So rather than thinking, I have got to get the price down to £1,000, or I've got to achieve a rate of £1,000, think, what must I get out of this? What do I intend to have out of this situation? What would I like to have? And what would I absolutely love to have? Because you may well be sitting in that situation, and if you employ the right conversational tactics, you could uncover a whole world of information that suddenly that £1,000 goal of yours, you've just realized that actually you can cut that in half. If your target was to get that price down to 1,000, you've just uncovered a little nugget, a little gem of information, and suddenly what you would have liked to have, well, now you've got a love to have situation there. So think a little bit more laterally about that conversation that you're having. It's never black and white, because ultimately you're dealing with another human being, and having this little middle framework is a good way to help you to think about that. And just like those Brexit negotiators, we really do need to think of what's our best alternative to a negotiated agreement. What I'm talking about there is, what if the talks fall apart? What if you just can't agree anything? What does that look like for you? You need to know what that looks like. You need to know what the worst case scenario is here. You need to have thought about that in advance so that you can respond and reflect in the negotiation itself. Because the less new information that you need to take on board in that conversation, the more equipped you'll be to respond appropriately. So a little bit of reflection in advance will help you to go into that situation more prepared. So that's the first step, setting your goals. Our second step is to plan ahead. And this little tool, an Accusations Audit, and by the way, this Accusations Audit is a tool that will work in a difficult conversation. It also works when you're going in to deliver a keynote speech or deliver a presentation. You sit and you think about your target audience, you think about the person that you're negotiating with, and you think, what would they say to me? This little accusations audit tool for me has, I think, made me hundreds of thousands of pounds in my life. I remember one particular salary negotiation where I needed to go in and I needed to ask for a particular salary. And I was moving country at the time. At the time of this particular salary negotiation, I was living in Japan and I was moving to a job in London. I was moving to London where I knew 3 people. I had no contact base in London to speak of, and I was moving into a business development role. So when I sat down and wrote down my accusations audit, I had a particular salary level that I was asking for. I had done my research. I figured it was market rate. It looked pretty good for the market, but I knew that I needed to justify that to my potential new boss. So I sat down and wrote down a list of accusations, a list of counter arguments, if for want of a better word, that he could have given me to my salary request. And the first thing, you know, in a salary negotiation, the first thing that's going to come out straight off the bat, you're being unreasonable, we can't afford that. Those sort of basic ones, they're the easy ones to think of. And probably pretty quickly, you can get to a list of about 5 things that your counterpart could potentially throw back at you when you make your request. So for me, where the gold was in this one was really thinking about things like, well, you're moving to a new city, you have no contacts. Why should I pay you all that salary when it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to call on any kind of a contact list to generate business quickly? That was definitely one that I was going to get. So what I needed to do was to think in advance of all of the things that he could have potentially said to me, and in my mind, find a counter argument to each one of those. And very often when you're going into a difficult conversation, there are emotions there for you, and those emotions you may not even have an awareness around them. So when you're building an accusations audit, it's really good if you can find a trusted person to speak with, a trusted friend, a trusted colleague, somebody who understands the situation that you're negotiating, and to run through your accusations audit with them. Because when you do that, it's inevitable they will come up with one more thing that you haven't thought of. So call on your support network, and any difficult conversation, any challenging situation you find yourself in, you will always benefit if you can call on your support network. And here's a very specific ask that you can make of somebody. Can I have 10 minutes of your time? I want to run an idea by you. This will take 10 minutes, no more. So that accusations audit. Armed with that accusations audit for my salary negotiation, I knew that one of the things he was going to come back to me about was the idea that I didn't have a contact base. So my response to that was how I already knew so many of my target clients in the Tokyo market. I already had those connections and really good client relationships actually there that I could call on for introductions to their London colleagues. So that was absolutely something that I came back with. In terms of getting up to speed quickly, well, one of the things that we had there was absolutely my contact base was no question about it. It was a handicap. But what I did have in my favor was all of the work that I'd been doing in Tokyo was really in a very innovative space that really was at the vanguard of what the stock markets were doing at the time. I was working in the stock markets. I was working as a stockbroker at the time, and the Japanese markets were streets ahead of any of the other global markets. So one of the things that I was able to talk about to my boss, who was fast-paced, who was results-oriented, who wanted to achieve targets, and I knew that about him, was the fact that I was bringing all of this experience from the Tokyo market, which was probably at that stage 2 years ahead of where London was, and that I was going to be able to hit the ground running on that. That was not experience that was going to be readily found in the London market because they weren't just where Tokyo was at the time. And that, in the end, was what swung it. Suddenly, because I thought about those accusations in advance, suddenly we weren't having a conversation about money anymore. There was no thought process, even no conversation even went into that. That just was the baseline. That was the acceptance of what it was that I was going to get paid. And that simple act of building an accusations audit, a really rigorous accusations audit before I went into the conversation, was what secured me that salary. Nothing more valuable than that. So that preparation piece will help you every time. Setting goals. Planning ahead, thinking through your accusations audit, 2 really important steps. The third piece of preparation that you can do is to expose the elephant. And what am I talking about here? Well, when it comes to a negotiation, we need to have empathy for the other party. Now, when I talk to people about empathy, there sometimes can be a confusion that arises between empathy on the one hand and sympathy on the other. When I talk about empathy, what I'm talking about is your ability to take perspective on the other person's situation. So this was summed up for me by a participant in a workshop so very nicely. It's not how you would feel walking a mile in their shoes. It's actually having the perspective of how they feel walking a mile in their shoes. So it's about understanding, it's about looking at the world through their eyes. It's looking at the world and feeling what it is that they feel. That is what empathy is. So there's perspective taking involved there. And also crucially, there's a freedom from judgment. And that brings us back to all of those emotional blockers that we have coming into a difficult conversation. We will all have preset ideas about the individual that we're having a conversation with. They're so awkward. They never give way on anything. They just are set in their ways. We all have these preset assumptions. And actually, much as these shortcuts help us in our lives, they help us to navigate danger, they help to keep us out of trouble. In a negotiation, it's actually about wiping the slate clean and walking in there judgment-free and taking this conversation as a unique, discrete event, free from previous experience and treating it as such. So if you have an overbearing boss, it's about going in there, ditching all of those confidence wobbles that you've had in relation to that conversation. It's about going in there, wiping the slate clean. A lot of work goes into this because there's a whole bunch of emotional baggage that holds us back going into those conversations. And it's about tuning in to that other person. Now, when we with sympathy in any shape or form, if I was to suggest to you that you were going into a negotiation with Donald Trump, for example, that might be the point at which your empathy breaks down completely and you're thinking, oh, can't actually get inside that person's head. Let me tell you, we all have Donald Trumps in our lives. We all have those individuals who hijack our emotional well-being. But if you can't get inside their head and understand what it is that they want out of this conversation with you, what their objectives are, what their big picture is, what's going on in their world, if you can't understand that, if you can't develop that empathy, that understanding, it doesn't mean that you have to agree with their values. It doesn't mean that you have to like them, but you do have to understand where they're coming from. And if you can invest the time, get rid of the emotion, the blockages that are going on for us all, if you can get rid of that and tune into how that other person is feeling, that is absolutely a key to your success. So we're not confusing empathy and sympathy here. Empathy is about perspective taking and it is about freedom from judgment. So armed with that, you're going into this conversation, you've developed your goals, you've built your accusations audit, you're now taking an empathy-based approach to the conversation. And your job now is to expose the elephant, is to find out what's really going on with that other person. If they're asking you to pay £1,000, why is that? What's actually forcing them into that particular situation? You've only got a budget of 800. How are you going to arrive at something that keeps both of you happy? You need to uncover what the drivers are, what's going on behind that. And to do that, that is about tuning in and listening. So that brings us then to the next part of our negotiation framework, part 4, where you get them talking. In a negotiation, in an ideal scenario, we're looking at the 80-20 rule. They're talking 80% of the time. You're talking 20% of the time, because the more they're talking, the more you're learning and the more opportunity you've got to find a way forward, a way that you can both agree. So how do you get them talking? Well, because your job is to let them do the talking, it means we're back into the other part of the communication continuum, and your job is to sit back and listen. Active listening is where we're at here. And what you're listening for is what they're not saying as much as what they're saying. So when we talk about active listening, We're thinking about how we tune into the emotional changes in that conversation. If you're hearing a little bit of resistance, you're listening for the tone of voice. You're on screen, you don't necessarily have access to the same body language cues, but if you're in the room, you most definitely do. But the key thing you can do, on screen or off, is use this little acronym for your active listening approach. This comes from a TED Talk by Julian Treasure, about 8 minutes long, called How to Speak So That People Really Listen. And this will help you to tune into your counterpart in a difficult conversation or in a negotiation. First things first, it's about receiving what the other person has to say. Now, believe it or not, it sounds really simple, but half the time we're bringing so much baggage into these conversations. You're stressing about the row that you had this morning. You're thinking about the big presentation that you have going on next week. You've got a whole lot of distractions going on in your head, and you're not bringing your whole self to that conversation. First things first, find a routine to ground yourself before you go into that conversation. I don't know what that might be for you. It could be breathing. It could be getting out into the fresh air for a little bit of a walk before you go and have the conversation, but your head needs to be clear. You need to be present. So receive, be in a place where you're open to what you're about to hear, no matter how unpersuadable that other person might be. It's really important for you to be present. Next thing is to appreciate what they're saying. And what we're talking about here is tuning in and showing them that you're listening. So across the screen, we don't have the opportunity to cut across with the right, okay. We don't have the opportunity to do that. You turn into a bit of a Churchill nodding dog type scenario here, where there's a bit of this nod, and the open expression on your face. We actually can cultivate an open expression. It's the Botox look. And what we're talking about there is a slightly raised eyebrow that shows I'm open, I'm curious. This face versus this face, which one would you prefer to negotiate with? It's having that open face, that appreciation of, yes, I'm not agreeing with what you're saying necessarily, but I am open and I am listening. And the third part of this little RASA acronym, this summarize piece, this, all of the research shows universally in pretty much every conversation ever invented, is the part of the conversation that falls down most and breaks down most often, the summarizing piece. So what I've heard you say is, if I could clarify that, I would say you need to summarize what you've heard. And summarizing does one of two things. You've either pretty much summarized things as they see it, in which case they feel listened to, which is a good place to be, or you've summarized something and actually you haven't tuned into what they've said at all. You've got it completely wrong. They were actually saying something else. Well, you've also achieved a good result here, because that has given you the opportunity to bring that conversation into sharp focus. So the summarizing is where we need to look at. And the final piece of your negotiator's toolkit here is the asking, the questions that further clarify your understanding of what's going on. So RASA is a fabulous little acronym. Let's break it down further and let's take a little look at the summarizing and the asking part of the RASA acronym, because they are the parts that we regularly and often fail to get involved in. We start to steer that conversation off our direction and we forget about the person that we're sitting in front of. So what I'm talking about here is not your paramedics or even your paraverbals or your paralegals. I'm talking about your paraverbals. And in a conversation, it's so important that we think about our vocal tone and our body language just as much as our words. And when there is dissonance, when there is a disconnect between our body language and our tone of voice and the words that are coming out of our mouth, that's when you shut down the understanding from the other person's point of view. So if I'm saying to you, I'm delighted to be here today, my body language is matching my words versus I'm delighted to be here today. At the point at which there's a disconnect between the words that are coming out of my mouth and the body language that I'm conveying, I really agree with you versus I really agree with you. When you're thinking, I'm only just saying those words because I don't know what to say in this conversation, happens so very frequently. And that's for those of us that feel like we're in this conversation and we want to be liked, that disconnect between our true feelings that are going on down here and the words that are coming out of our mouth. Your counterpart is reading that. Whether you like it or not, you're sending them the body language signals, and your vocal tone is giving it away as well. We're as human beings, we're tuned into these paraverbals so much. So if you're sitting there saying, yeah, but you're not really agreeing with them, that is immediately apparent to your counterpart. They are picking up on that. So making sure that we've got alignment between all of these. And that's the thing too. We don't want to be in a conversation saying things that we don't agree with, which is why we need to employ these conversational tactics to try and get our counterpart talking. Because the way to influence is to begin with warmth, in accordance with this research from Harvard Business School, conducted with another famous TED talker, Amy Cuddy, the famous Harvard social psychologist. Because what we need to do in any difficult conversation is build the foundation of trust first. Before people decide what they think of your message, they decide what they think of you, and your body language and your tone of voice contribute to that. And this is something which in all of the negotiation literature, when we start to talk about our tone of voice in a negotiation, we start to think of this late night FM DJ voice. I'm not sure how many of you spend time in the evenings driving around the highways and the byways at about 10, 11 o'clock at night. That's when all those love songs start to come on, and you end up with that DJ whose voice just washes over you like velvet. That's the tone of voice that you need to bring to your difficult conversations, because we need to keep the emotions at a nice, calm, manageable level. So making sure that we're conscious and aware of the tone of voice. The same question asked in two different tones of voice can mean two completely different things. What do you want to do about it versus what do you want to do about it? Two completely different meanings there. And actually, so very often in these difficult conversations, it's the tone of voice that ends up causing people bother. So being aware of the body language, being aware of the paraverbals is an important part of your negotiation. It's an important part of this conversation piece. Go back to our RASA acronym, and when we think about the summarizing piece, when we think about how you get into the conversation, you're listening and you're appreciating what they're saying, now it comes to the part of the conversation where you need to summarize it. Well, here are the 3 tools that will help you in every challenging conversation, in every negotiation that you ever have, because these are like your detective tools. These are the tools that you'll employ to uncover what's really going on here. Why are they being so obtuse? How can I persuade them to my point of view? People persuade themselves, and you can end up using these tools to talk somebody into something that's completely opposite to the point of view that they might have taken at the beginning of the conversation. The more they talk, the more you find that they talk themselves into a position. So labels, mirrors, and open questions. These will be your stock in trade. Let's take a look at what they mean. Well, labels. When we look at any difficult conversation, any negotiation, there are emotions underpinning it. Maybe they don't want to lose face. Maybe this is the deal of a lifetime for them. Maybe they're your teenager and you know what? They need to assert their authority over you. There are emotions going on here, and make no bones about it. If you can use a label, it's a really non-threatening way to expose what's really going on for somebody. You're in a negotiation with somebody and they say, but the email said, but the last time we spoke, you said. Very direct, immediately sets that conversation up for conflict. On the other hand, it seems like from the emails that I've been receiving, this is the situation. You're saying the same thing. You're just giving them an out. You're giving them an opportunity to justify their position. You're giving them an opportunity to talk. You're giving them an opportunity to clarify their thinking. And actually, half the time you'll find that a little bit of labeling and the response that it engenders helps them to see how unreasonable they're being. Half the time, not all of the time. So there's more that you can do to encourage them over to your side of the fence. It seems like, it looks like, it sounds like these 3 labels will change your life. Stick them up on the wall behind your computer, write them down, because if you start to use those in your conversations from now on, you will uncover all manner of information. And the minute you start to focus on that summarizing piece of RASA, the moment you start to think going into this conversation, remember, you can't control the outcome, but you can control the process. The minute you start to think differently about that conversation and you start to think of it as an opportunity for clarity, an opportunity to summarize what's going on, you'll find that you avoid all of that unnecessary sharing of commonality that happens. Somebody's sitting in front of you and they like puppies. Well, I like puppies too. And you know, what breed of puppy do you like? That's not what you're there to talk about. You're not there to talk about you. You're there for them to talk about what's going on for them. And those labels are a brilliant conversational tool to keep a conversation moving along without you imposing your point of view. Here's an even better one. And actually, this little video that I'm about to play has nothing got to do with the mirroring technique in conversation at all, but it's just a really cute video. This is a toddler finding a mirror for the first time in a department store. What? There's two of me? Mirroring in a conversation is, technically speaking, there's a couple of ways to go about it, but at its most basic level, mirroring in a conversation is where you take round about the last 3-4 words of what the other person said and you reflect it back to them. I really like driving in the sunshine. Driving in the sunshine, and allow the conversation to flow organically that way. When you get tuned into the whole idea of mirroring and you're really tuning into the emotion within somebody's sentence, you'll end up picking a key phrase out of the middle of the sentence somewhere. But this is probably a tricky technique to get the hang of. It's one that can be incredibly powerful because you're not putting your words into the conversation. You're reflecting your counterpart's words back. There's no room for misunderstanding. You're reflecting it back and you're simply asking for clarity. But you don't even have to think of the question because all you're doing is you're taking their words and you're mirroring them back to them. And that again keeps that conversation in the domain where you're in uncovering what's going on for that person. So a little bit of a challenging technique, but one that it takes a few reps to get good at. It takes a few reps to develop your confidence and your competence in this one. And actually the research shows that it can take between 40 and 60 reps of a new skill like this one before you get really good at it. But what I would suggest you try is find a conversation with a loved one, a low stakes conversation, maybe not your next big salary negotiation or the next big union negotiation that you need to have with your staff. Find a low risk situation and try employing that mirroring technique in it and watch how it uncovers all manner of information that you agreeing with them or disagreeing with them just doesn't. Labels, mirrors, absolutely brilliant for that summarizing piece of the RASA acronym. Then we can move on to the open questions. And you know what? Not all questions are created equal. Some of the most powerful open questions that can be used in any difficult conversation, in any negotiation, I've popped them up on the slide. You can take a little snap of them if you want. I think to have these printed off, to have them stuck on the wall behind your screen, to have them on your desk to help guide any conversation. Certainly you can be in the middle of a conversation thinking, where do I go next with this one? I am encountering all sorts of resistance here. I'm really stuck. Having this little cheat sheet of open questions that you can glance down and look at and pop up and ask in the moment can really help you to steer a conversation into clarity. Your opening question at the beginning of any conversation where we're just trying to get the issues out on the table. What's on your mind at the moment? What's going on for you? Then you're in the conversation and there's a lot of chat back and forth and, you know, it's kind of going off down tangents and it's going off down tangents because they're avoiding the real issue. What's the core issue here for you? What's really at the bottom of all this? This particular change that we're suggesting, how does this affect things? How would this affect the team? How will this affect the project? And straight away, you'll get their unadulterated response to that one. And that gives you loads of opportunities there for labels and mirrors. It seems like, it looks like, it feels like the team isn't on board with this. I'm right, you're darn right the team's not on board. Well, here's why. Michael said this, and Mary said that, and John said the other. That will give you access to so much information that you can do really good things with. This one, the real power one, this is when you're up against the stubborn person. This is when you're up against a disagreeable person. Sometimes you'll find you're just talking to the messenger. So what do your colleagues see as the biggest challenge with this here? What's going on with your team? What does your team think? And there you may find lies the solution to the problem. The person you're negotiating with has no power, has no budget, has no control. They've just been sent in there to deliver the message. And if you can uncover that information, there's a lot you can do with that. What are we trying to accomplish? A really powerful question. I have seen so many people talk themselves out of really ridiculous situations with, how do we do that? Well, let me tell you, yeah, right enough, it's going to be a bit hard. They'll end up, that shuts down so many difficult conversations, shuts down so many negotiations that are going the wrong way. And then at the end of every conversation, it's a question worth asking. What was most useful about this conversation for you? The power questions, you think you've got to the bottom of it? And what else? What do you want? How can I help? So that little conversational toolkit will help you to expose so much of what's blocking that other person, that Donald Trump, that unreasonable person, that person who knows it all, that narcissist who's sitting in front of you. Give them the opportunity to talk and watch what happens. And you know what? The great thing, one of the great benefits of the online world is you can stick all these notes up behind your computer. You can have all sorts of inspiration around you that nobody needs to know about. You can look at the wall and come up with the absolute killer question that's going to unlock the key to the answer to your problem. And you know what? One point before we move off this particular topic, we're coming towards the end of our event now, resistance. If you encounter resistance, get in the habit of viewing that as a friendly little reminder to guide that conversation into clarity. If you encounter resistance either in yourself, I don't want to be talking about this, that's, you need to look at that for yourself. There's something going on for you there that perhaps you're haven't even got a self-awareness of. If that resistance is coming from you, ask yourself what's going on there. But if the resistance is coming from the other person, that is absolutely your opportunity to get that conversational toolkit going and in a very non-threatening way to uncover what's going on for that individual. So that is your 4-step framework so far. And then the last piece is, what's the package? There's always give and take. So the answer to any solution is not to divide a pie down the middle. If somebody's arguing black and somebody else is arguing white, very often grey is not the right answer. You may need to throw it all in the bin and come up with a completely different solution altogether. So that's what the point of these conversational tactics are, to uncover the real drivers behind why they are so stuck in their point of view. Because when you uncover that information, that unlocks all the creativity that you need to arrive at a beautiful conclusion to a difficult conversation. So it's never necessarily about finding a compromise. It's about uncovering the information, uncovering the blockage, and finding how you can both arrive at a creative solution together. That, in summary, is your 5-step conversation. It brings us now towards the end of our event, and I am very open to taking questions, to having a conversation, to uncovering any of the challenges that you might have in these difficult conversations. If you've enjoyed today's events, please do get in touch with Mid-Ulster District Council on Twitter. You'll see their handle up on the screen in front of you. If you've enjoyed some of the things that I've talked about today and you think some of them make sense, we have recently at Bespoke Communications launched our YouTube channel, and at the moment we have a free media training course up there, and some of the things that we look at are actually conversational opportunities to exert influence, executive presence, some of these ideas. Hop onto YouTube, search for Bespoke Communications and subscribe for free advice. We have a series of videos going up between now and Christmas that will complete out that media training course for you. And I have one little ask of you for today. If you've enjoyed today's session, if there has been value for you in today's session, people build trust with us through our Google reviews. If it was within your gift to hop on Google and to pop Bespoke Communications into the search toolbar, you'll see our little Google My Business page pop up on the right-hand side. If it was within your gift to leave a review, both my lovely business partner, Sarah Travers, and I would love to hear from you. It's been my pleasure to share this time with you today. Sarah, I've seen you pop up on the screen, so I think that means that we have got some questions coming up in the chat. I would love to hear, in fact, I can see them now myself. I just see them coming to light now. So yes. I would love to answer those questions.
Yes, we just got a couple. Just the first one is, and this is quite a good one. I'm sure people will, this will be from their own experience perhaps. If you have an unsuccessful negotiation, I don't know, for example, for your salary or anything else, how would you suggest approaching it for a second time in terms of length of time or bringing up the subject again?
So just clarify that question for me. We've had an unsuccessful negotiation. Is that what's happened?
Right. Yes, unsuccessful. Okay. And just basically, how would you go about approaching it again at a later date?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of prep needed there. There's a little bit of a, there's an empathy piece there. So if you have gone into a negotiation, not every negotiation ends in success. This is life. But if you have entered into a salary negotiation or indeed any negotiation previously, I think a little bit of work is needed there to really align your goals and objectives with the goals and objectives of the other person. Presumably you're having the salary negotiation for the second time because you're still working for that company or you're still working for that person. So again, going back to the necessary conditions for a negotiation to take place, I'm assuming that there is a fair exchange of value going on. You enjoy working for the company, you want to continue working for the company, however you feel like your efforts could be better rewarded. I think it's about really looking hard at the person that you're negotiating with, usually, well, your boss or certainly the person, the decision maker, the budget holder there, and thinking, what are their goals and objectives? Have you gone in and really articulated what it is that you're talking, what you're bringing to the table in the terms that really add value to their direction of travel? That's absolutely the first place to start. Really getting down and dirty with that accusations audit, I think, is the first place to start. If you're to go back and reflect on the original salary negotiation, what were the reasons that they gave for not giving you the salary raise? They'll always say, well, I can't afford it, and just not right now, you're being unreasonable, we don't have budget. These are always the basic things that they say. Get really down and dirty with what could they possibly say to me if I go in and ask for a salary negotiation. And this is where emotions can block us. I think you really do need a trusted colleague or a trusted friend to sit and hold your hand on this one and talk you through really straight up, right, here's what they possibly could say, and here's what you're going to say back. They're going to say, no, we don't have budget. Well, actually, you know, when you look at my work over the course of the last year, you'll notice that I've contributed to these 3 projects, which generated X amount of revenue for the company. And I'd like to think that I could continue to build on that experience and continue to add value for the company in that way, as an example. So to summarize that, what I'm talking about is empathy, the empathy piece, the perspective taking piece. What does that person that you're negotiating with, what are their goals and objectives? How do you get inside their head? How do you get inside their heart? How do you add value to them? And then get down with your 5-step framework and do a little bit of work around that accusations audit to help prepare you for that conversation.
Brilliant. And we've just had another one into the Q&A just to ask you to go over mirroring again, if that's all right.
Mirroring. Okay, yeah, mirroring, it's a really difficult thing to do when I am in a conversation all by myself. But I'll tell you what, Sarah, do you know what? You haven't volunteered for this, but I'm going to ask you a question, if that's all right. Perhaps demonstrated by example. So, Sarah, you and I have been chatting. We don't know one another terribly well, but you strike me as being a very warm and empathetic person. So if I was to ask you about something that you're passionate about, I'm going to give you the option to be a lover or a hater. So you can tell me about something that you absolutely love to do. Maybe it's surfing on the North Coast. Maybe it is running through the forest. Maybe it is traveling around Italy. I don't know. It could be something that you really enjoy doing, or it could be something that drives you absolutely crazy. And, you know, whenever I do that one, people come up with all sorts of things, but queues tend to feature heavily in that one. Road rage tends to feature heavily in that one. I don't mind. You can be a lover or a hater, but tell me something that you're really into, something that you're really passionate about, good or bad.
So then, so we'll try and we'll keep it positive. We'll go for a lover. this is going to sound like a random plug for something, but I love to do any form of exercise that is fun. I go to a class called Boogie Bounce Extreme, which is trampolining with music and things like that. If exercise isn't fun, I won't do it. So anything sort of trampolining or things like that.
Trampolining or things like that?
Yes.
It feels to me like the fun quotient of the exercise is what gets you to the gym. That is what gets you out there.
Yes.
Right. Well, that didn't work at all. But basically, what I did, Sarah, I took the last 3 words of Sarah's sentence and I mirrored it back to her. And this is a challenge to do in a public forum because, first of all, you've got, I don't know, 40 people watching your incredibly awkward conversation. So it's never going to be a natural thing to do. But Roisin, what I hope that demonstrated to you was how you use mirroring. I can think of an example recently where my sister is an educational psychologist. Mirroring, that's psychology 101. There are 1,000 techniques that she uses in her conversations, in her sessions with her clients to help to uncover what's going on for them. And it was back last Christmas and I was standing in her kitchen by the fridge and she was feeling a little bit hard done by in relation to a childhood friend, somebody who I know very well. And I mirrored her. She was ranting on. She had a whole reason why this particular friend was driving her mad. And I mirrored her. I took the last 3 words of her sentence and I mirrored it back to her, just for her to release all the tension, for her to release all of the frustration, for it all to come out. I did it once. I did it for a second time and she kept going. She just was on a roll. And then by the 3rd time she stopped and she started to laugh and she said, I can see what it is that you're doing here. I've seen you mirror me now 3 times. But it wasn't until I got to the 3rd time, and I did it out of badness. I did it just to try it out on her. But mirroring, when it's used appropriately in a conversation, when you take the last 3 words of somebody's sentence, you can end up reflecting back the topic that was being talked about in an entirely non-judgmental way. And the judgment is taken out of it because you're using their words. You're not putting your words on it. You're literally taking their words and you're reflecting them back. And all that you're doing there is you're trying to encourage them to keep talking so that either they see what's going on for them or you get to uncover new information. I hope that answers your question, Roisin.
I hope my example wasn't too terrible. Maybe I'm immune to mirroring. I don't know.
Maybe you are. But you know what? If we didn't have 40 people looking at our conversation, I think that would have been a whole lot easier.
Let's go with that. Perfect. I think that's it for our questions. Is there anything else for you, Camilla, before we wrap up?
I think that's me for today. Do please reach out, connect on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. Follow us on YouTube. Let's continue the journey together. The effects of these sessions, you know what, it's a little bit like a shower. It's never long lasting. We need to keep reminding ourselves to do these things every single day of our lives. So look, all I would say is, for me, speaking personally, and for probably at this stage hundreds of clients that I've worked with, if you can step back from the desire to contribute to the conversation, to open your mouth and talk, and instead pin back the ears, I think those listening techniques can have a tremendously transformational effect on your conversations. So I wish you all well, have a really wonderful day, and enjoy Mag's session later on this evening.
Yes, and also Camilla, just thank you to you so much for such a brilliant and thought-provoking presentation. I've definitely taken away lots of information, especially that I'm bad at mirroring. But as mentioned, everyone, just at the start of the webinar, you will be receiving the slides used in this session, as well as having access to the recording on the council's website. As well as this, you'll also receive a short feedback survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you could complete this and let us know what you thought of the webinar and what your best takeaway has been. All feedback's welcome, both positive and negative. This will help the council design next year's programme of events. Don't forget to tune into Council's Facebook page on Monday evening to see if you're today's daily prize winner. Draws for all 4 days of this week will be made tomorrow, and if you're the lucky recipient of either an iPad or a Fitbit, one of the officers will be in contact with you. Just before we go, we are coming to the end of Enterprise Week 2021, but we do have one final webinar this evening. As Camilla mentioned, we have Max McAlpin, Recreating the Magic of Retail, this evening at 7 p.m. So make sure you want to attend, you go online and register. So again, on behalf of Mid-Ulster District Council, thank you so much for your attendance and your interaction today. I really hope we're sending you away with lots of information to use in your daily business. Thank you for coming. See you next time. And thank you again to you, Camilla.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.